Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank all participants in this emergency debate tonight for participating. I'd like to thank my colleague from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston for his submissions just before me, and in particular I'd like to thank my friend and deputy critic, the MP from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, for bringing this emergency debate to the floor of the House of Commons. Certainly a lot of Canadians in the last few weeks and months have probably learned a lot about Myanmar and the plight of the Rohingya people. And that's part of what our mandate as parliamentarians should be, to make sure that our comfort here in Canada, the remarkable freedoms that we have that are often displaced from those suffering, Parliament can be used to bring the plight of some of these peoples to light. And I think I'd like to comment on the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, because he didn't just bring the debate here this week, Madam Speaker, after several weeks of front-page coverage in the Globe and Mail and other sources. The first time he advocated in this House for Rohingyas was March 2016, Madam Speaker. And I think that's an important note to raise. And I do know that some of my other colleagues in this House, particularly those on the subcommittee for human rights, have been raising the plight of these peoples for some time, and a tragic situation that has gone from dislocation and profound discrimination to death, dislocation, and certainly, as we've heard in this debate tonight, ethnic cleansing and extreme violence. So I will use my portion of time to add to the debate, I hope, in part as the shadow cabinet member for the opposition for foreign affairs, to talk about why we should be helping the Rohingya of Myanmar, Madam Speaker. They are a religious minority in that country. They make up approximately 1.1 million in a country of 53 million, and they're a Muslim minority population confined largely to the Rakhine province of the country that borders southeastern Bangladesh, Madam Speaker. That's why we've heard so much about refugee and dislocation into that country. There's been people fleeing persecution, violence, and certainly trying to escape what appears to be a sustained effort by the government to suppress a people, Madam Speaker, a religious minority. There have been to date, going back several years now, 500,000 approximately displaced, either on a semi-permanent or permanent basis, Madam Speaker, including tens of thousands in camps run by the government, Madam Speaker, almost entirely made up of a minority Muslim population. So it's not confined to poverty or areas within the province. It is clearly defined to an identifiable minority group. And that's what I think leads to concern. It's hard to get verified reports, and I know my colleagues have been working on this, but there's thousands have been killed or are missing, Madam Speaker. You've seen reports of 3, 4, 10,000, but it's easy to say that thousands have been killed or are displaced or are missing. And then, of course, terrible crimes against humanity, including a rape as a weapon, have been engaged as well, Madam Speaker. So we heard the minister this week raise the term ethnic cleansing in this House. We've heard the UN High Commissioner for Refugees use the same language. My friend from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston suggests genocide is the better term. Regardless of the term, Madam Speaker, Canadians should be shocked and deeply concerned by what is happening to a religious minority peoples, particularly in a country who have as their state councillor one of 5 recipients of honorary Canadian citizenship. So I'm hoping with this debate, Aung San Suu Kyi can see that Canadians and Canada United is calling for intervention and a cessation to this displacement and ethnic cleansing that appears to be going on with respect to an identifiable minority religion in that country. It troubled me, Madam Speaker, that this figure of the world, Nobel laureate, honorary citizen, did not appear at the UN General Assembly last week, Madam Speaker. She sent a note. And if you read the diplomatic letter, I'll quote from it, quote, "There has been much concern around the world with regard to the situation in Rakhine. It is not the intention of the Myanmar government to apportion blame or abrogate responsibility. We condemn all human rights violations and unlawful violence. We are committed to the restoration of peace, stability, and rule of law throughout the state," end quote. That's not happening, Madam Speaker. So those are empty words if a state councillor cannot control the military and the machinery of government, which has clearly been involved in targeting a minority population, not just in the last few weeks when a lot of Canadians have been attuned to the issue. I will point to a report from an office this government cancelled, but the great work done by Ambassador Andrew Bennett as our Ambassador for Religious Freedoms. Here's a headline from CTV online in May 2015, Madam Speaker. Canada's Religious Freedom Envoy denounces treatment of Rohingya Muslims. In fact, Madam Speaker, that was the first time I became aware of this profound state of long-standing discrimination where over 1 million people in that country are not granted the rights that others in Myanmar are granted. And Mr. Bennett began advocating for that religious minority population back in the final months of his mandate. What is great about Mr. Bennett, Madam Speaker? Last month, he was still writing editorial opinions, challenging Canadians, challenging the world to take the plight of the Rohingyas seriously. I think all Canadians, including Liberals in this House, Madam Speaker, should be concerned that that office was cancelled by this government. An office meant to defend the defenseless. An office that was beginning to raise the plight of Rohingya before the former minister, Stéphane Dion, turned the lights out. And I'm glad we're asking some questions because I'm looking to where this new Office of Human Rights, Freedom and Inclusion has been. Remember, Madam Speaker, they said, we're not just closing the Office of Religious Freedoms, we're expanding it. Absolute silence, Madam Speaker, from this office or quasi-office Department of Global Affairs. Where else was there silence, Madam Speaker? From Canada's Prime Minister last week at the UN General Assembly, where the plight of the Rohingya was not mentioned. So, as my friends in this place know, I think there are times where we can work together, like in this debate. But I really dislike the fact that an office, a nonpartisan, specialized ambassador-level office to fight for religious minorities was cancelled, Madam Speaker, out of petty politics. And it's refreshing that that ambassador that was politically let go is still advocating for the Rohingya. I hear more from Andrew Bennett, citizen, than I do from this Office of Human Rights, Freedom and Inclusion. That's got to change, Madam Speaker. And I really do think the Prime Minister had an opportunity with the UN General Assembly, with his second appearance now as a Prime Minister in the mid-part of his term, to use some of his goodwill that the Liberals love to talk about, to leverage that goodwill to show Canada's role as a traditional leader of middle powers, Madam Speaker. And I'll tell you, I'm refreshed by the fact that Rohingyas who have come to Canada for the safety and security we offer have been emailing me, and I want to thank them. Just before coming here, I read the latest letter from Syed Husseini, who has challenged the government and all parliamentarians to work together, have matching funds, accelerate refugees, provide technical assistance, and a number of other smart recommendations, but also to call for change, Madam Speaker. So Canada should leverage the aid that Global Affairs provide. We should leverage and push our honorary citizen to not just send diplomatic notes to the UN General Assembly, but to make assurances that ethnic cleansing or targeting of a religious minority population in Myanmar comes to an end, Madam Speaker. This is what the Parliament of Canada can do. Educate our fellow citizens on the plight of the oppressed, and then serve as a leader of a middle power to try and help those in need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my friend across the way for his intervention this evening. I think it is important to clear the record here and state unequivocally that the matter of how Canada can continue to intervene and play a leadership role on the situation in Myanmar, on the crisis that is faced in the Rakhine State, the situation facing the Rohingya, was raised by our Prime Minister in his meetings with counterparts at the UNGA last week, in addition to the leadership provided by our Minister of Foreign Affairs in her bilateral meetings with a number of allies. In addition, Canada has been present providing humanitarian assistance, $9 million in 2017 alone, including the recent announcement of $2.55 million on September 15th for the situation in the Rakhine State. In addition, there was the letter sent to Aung San Suu Kyi by the Prime Minister, clearly laying the responsibility to fix the situation on her shoulders, as well as that of the military leadership in Myanmar. Canada has been present, will continue to be present. It's great that this is being debated in the House of Commons this evening so Canadians can understand where Canada is, where the government of Canada is, and how we can work together to ensure that Canada continues to play a re-engaged role on the world scene. And I would ask my honourable colleague to acknowledge that the government of Canada certainly wants to be seen as an important leader in helping resolve this situation.
The honourable member for Durham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, for his comments. I do applaud the government and their pronouncement of aid. I do applaud the Minister for speaking so clearly on the plight of the Rohingya. I compliment the Prime Minister on his letter to Aung San Suu Kyi. The challenge, Madam Speaker, is I expect the Prime Minister of Canada not just to have meetings in the margins of the United Nations General Assembly. I expect the Prime Minister to use the privileged platform of that General Assembly to raise a few areas of the world where Canada and Canadians have concern. And Myanmar would have been one of those, Madam Speaker. My concern as the critic for foreign affairs is the Prime Minister's desire for a temporary seat on the Security Council may mean that Canada is more silent on these issues than normal. I hope that's not the case. But the very fact that the Prime Minister did not mention a single issue of concern on a foreign affairs basis at the UN General Assembly has me concerned that the pursuit of that seat could mean that Canada is a little more silent on issues when it comes to the persecution of peoples around the world, Madam Speaker. Add to that the fact that he cancelled the Office for Religious Freedoms, which was just starting to take up the case of the Rohingya, means the Prime Minister will have to prove to us that his intentions go beyond just sending some letters.
Questions and comments? We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his excellent remarks. Just want to add, as I thought he made great points about the Office of Religious Freedom. This office wasn't just there to speak out publicly. It was also there to inform the government about issues of faith as they relate to politics and foreign policy, to ensure that our department was understanding some of these complex interreligious and with the kind of overlays and interethnic conflicts that can exist, and making sure that we were fully informed in how we engage with those situations and informed in advance. The problem in this case, I think, was that the government was slow to see this problem and slow to react to it, and only really became fully engaged in the last few weeks in response to the current crisis. Does the member think that if we had the infrastructure in place to ensure that that informing was happening, perhaps we would have seen a faster response from the government?
The honourable member for Durham has about 40 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The simple answer is yes. That office was structured to provide support for the government and to point out the plight of peoples. I'll end with this, Madam Speaker. The rally cry of the Prime Minister following his election was "Canada is back." There's an absence of Canada when our leader does not even mention this at the United Nations General Assembly. There's an absence of Canada when we close down and shutter an office meant to speak up when people are being oppressed. I hope that a lot of Liberal MPs who I know care about this issue push the government on this issue and push this new office to take up the work Ambassador Bennett left off. Thank you.